countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's them skies.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh. Haze. Welcome back to that last comic shops in place.
Oh, my God.
Yes, you know, we're trying to read some of them's Blue Beetles this week, and I don't understand. You're going to talk about Beetles. Why don't we talk about the Beetle Baileys? I love the Beetle Bailey.
You know who you sounded like just then? You sounded like it's like a small side character in Back to the Future 2, who's played by the guy who does Roger Rabbit's voice, whatever his name is, who's like, I'm gonna put money down on the Cubbies. That guy. Like that's who you sounded like just there. But
anyway. This Chad, this is what I had to put up with when you were gone.
Oh, this is the worst. They did this at the show.
Welcome
That's
to
the whole car ride back. I almost left him in Hershey.
In any case, this is the last comic shop. I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson. I'm joined by my wonderful friends, J.A. Scott, Chad Smith, and the beautiful Mikey Wood. He's just gorgeous to look at. He's got this hair, man.
Hey, what are we reading today?
Are you a Dapper Dan man?
I am a Murray's man because my hair is too thick for like Royal Crown and Dapper Dan. It doesn't do anything but make it look greasy. So
is Dapper Dan a real thing? I think it
was. I don't think it is anymore. I think it was at one point.
Well, one thing that was certainly real was the fact that the Blue Beetle movie dropped last weekend, and so we all went to see it. Except for J.A., because he's boycotting all movies the rest of the summer that are comic book related. But we are making him read the Blue Beetle comic book. Because, again, this is a comic book podcast on a movie podcast. Yes. And oftentimes on these particular shows, we like to do those movie reviews. But we make you wait. So if you're here for the Blue Beetle movie review, you just got to stick around for a little while. We'll get to it. But first, we're going to go over a Blue Beetle comic book that you can pick up at your local comic book shop today if you are so inclined, because you might be walking out of that theater saying, I love that Jaime Reyes character, and I want to read more comics with him. I don't like Ted Kord. That's my Blue Beetle, but he's dead, I think. I don't know. Was he dead?
Yeah, this is after Dan Didio shot him in the face. I mean, Max Lord shot him in the face.
Shot him in the face.
Right.
And Wonder Woman snap at the neck. Crack!
That's right.
So, in any case, we are reading, it's a 12-part series that came out, I think, originally way back in the mid-2000s, right, Chad?
Yeah, this is circa 2006, spilling out of Infinite Crisis and the 1 year later time jump that happened in the DC books for no reason whatsoever.
So, who was involved with this particular Blue Beetle series?
Okay, well, you have Keith Giffen and John Rogers as writers. Occasionally, John Rogers will take the reins all by himself, but most of the time they are working together there. And on art duties across the 12 issues, you have quite a list. You've got Cully Hamner, Duncan Rouleau, Raphael Albuquerque, Cynthia Martin, Kevin West, Phil Moy, Jack Purcell, and Casey Jones as artists, with David Self and Guy Major on colors. Letters, you had Phil Balsman, Pat Brousseau, and Jared K. Fletcher.
Okay. Before we get into the actual 10-cent synopsis, I wanted to kind of pick the brain of our DC guru and fanboy extraordinary Michael Wood. This is the first time this Blue Beetle got a series, but this isn't the first time this Blue Beetle appeared in DC continuity, correct?
Infinite Crisis number 3 was his first appearance.
Okay.
But believe it or not, this is actually Blue Beetle Volume 7.
Wow.
Blue Beetle's been around since 1939. Dan Garrett and this is the second volume of DC Comics Blue Beetle. First one being Ted Kord, who everybody loves. And everybody was pissed off because of what happened with Ted Kord. Jaime's abilities have a direct connection with the Dan Garrett Blue Beetle, who they kind of mixed into the mix during the Ted Kord thing. It's a big, long thing. But my recommendation in this episode will help you guys, the whole Blue Beetle thing. So
and that was going to be my question. Has it always been that there's the thing with the scarab and the Blue Beetle costume comes out of the scarab and then it's like Iron Man and the wings and stuff? Or is that...
No, this is the first time it's been sort of like a techno suit kind of vibe. Dan Garrett did get his powers from a scarab. But there's, retconny stuff and rehistories and things like that because, things that happened in 1939 don't really work nowadays.
Yeah.
Or they could,
bitten by a radioactive scarab.
That's right. That's right.
But no, to Andy's original question, this actually is the first appearance, though, of Jaime Reyes, because he just shows up as Blue Beetle in Infinite Crisis.
Oh, yeah.
But as alter ego in issue number 1, that's where he shows up for the first time.
That's right.
Okay. Well, we'll get into this in my initial thoughts. I think J.A.'s initial thoughts, too, because I thought this series was very, very confusing. But let's get that 10-cent synopsis to see if we can kind of at least lay the groundwork for what happens in these first 12 issues. Mikey?
Yes. Jaime Reyes becomes the Blue Beetle. The end. No, so yeah. No, Jaime receives a wonderful bioorganic techno suit that communicates with him and can sort of generate different forms of weaponry. And he runs afoul of many different folks. And the first 12 issues, a lot happens. But really, the actual 10-cent synopsis is Barrio Kid gets powers. So with great power comes great responsibility. He's DC Spider-Man. He really is.
Oh, yeah. No, there's some definite parallels between this particular 12-issue arc and, the original issues from Amazing Spider-Man, except those issues were not so confusing.
He didn't have as many flashbacks and things. There's a lot of time jumping in these first few issues, and they may or may not do it successfully.
And I will say, too, I feel like No Way Home borrowed a lot of upstart new hero in a fancy suit that talks back to him.
Yeah.
It definitely pulled some elements that are similar to notes they play here in the Blue Beetle series.
Well, I wanted to throw it over to J.A. because I think we're on the same page in terms of the narrative flow of this particular book. For me, this reminded me of a lot of the shortcomings that a lot of fans were grousing about when it came to the Book of Boba Fett. Maybe if they would have told the story more chronologically, it would have been easier to read. What do you think about that with the flashback parts being unnecessary, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, coming in without any background on this and not having read First Crisis or Eighth Crisis or whatever crisis the crisis was. Infinite. It goes on forever. Whatever. Having not read that.
Wouldn't it have been Infinite Crises?
It should. Yes.
Should have been. It's really good, though. It really is.
Or Crisis to the Infinite.
But anyway.
I thought this whole book was unnecessarily convoluted. 200 pages in, I still don't know what the heck is going on. Why does the Green Lantern Corps not like Blue Beetle, and why are they fighting to the death with each other when they're supposed to be heroes? And why did they all leave him behind because he was phasing in some alternate reality? And why does that matter? And why do we care? And why was he gone for a year? And then it got into, to draw your Star Wars parallel, a little bit of where everyone is related to Luke Skywalker and everything is interconnected, because then the aunt of his girlfriend is like the head of this crime boss family that's capturing all these kids with powers and putting them in like a Club Med for kids with powers, but they're happy to be there, but some of them aren't. And
don't forget the gangs.
Oh, right. And there's gangs.
The posse and
and there's some people who wear the gang colors but aren't in the gang. They still wear the gang colors. Makes them in the gang, doesn't it? I don't know. I struggled. I'm not going to lie. I struggled with this book.
Okay. Who wants to come to the book's defense? We'll start with Chad. Chad, are you defending this at all?
I will say I enjoyed parts of this, and especially for me, the parts that really spoke to me more so were whenever the Blue Beetle was interacting with the rest of the DC universe. So there's that issue there where he's working alongside the Justice League. He's like, I can't wait to tell everybody I worked with Batman. And he's like, tell him it was Superman. It's like, why? He's like, trust me, everybody likes Superman. He's like, don't people like you? No. And, those interactions were lots of fun. And whenever Blue Beetle was able to bounce off people at his power level, and even towards the end, by the time they brought in Peacemaker, another Charlton character, I thought that was really cool. It's a different Peacemaker than what I've been used to. Yeah, I think there was potential here with the story. I don't think it landed all the time for me, so I'm not going to stick up for it too much. There are some hiccups with the supporting cast and a little bit of confusion amongst the story, but at the end of the day, it is a fun young hero. He's got a super cool look. Definitely some issues were better than others, but like those pages when he's in Blue Beetle armor just look so badass, no matter who's drawing it. I feel like this is a character, if you let him play inside the universe, he could be tons of fun and something that is an additive to the DCU. As much as I was a fan of Ted Kord, I wasn't upset when they brought in Jaime Reyes to include some different perspectives in the DCU. I just wish it didn't come at the expense of my guy Ted Kord. But
I just couldn't get over the fact that when he was in Blue Beetle armor, you could still see his teeth. I was like, his teeth aren't armored, though. What happens if he gets punched in the face?
Yeah, it's the only part of your skeleton you can see.
Yeah, that's true. They might be the armor's teeth and not his teeth, though.
Oh, that would be true. Weird.
Yes.
All right, Mikey, you're the DC guy. Stick up for this.
I definitely see where the time jumps and everything can really make it confusing. And maybe a linear storytelling thing would have been better. I like the kid, though. I mean, honestly, there's two teenage hero archetypes. There's the one that embraces it and the one that doesn't want it. That's it. And he's one of the ones that doesn't want it at first. But then he starts to kind of really vibe with the things that he can do. The reason it jumps a year is because all of the heroes were sort of yoinked from the planet, and then they came back. He's been gone. As far as his family knows, he's been gone for a year. He went missing. And the way it affects his family, the family characters are done really, really well. His relationship with his father is done really well. The dialogue, I mean, Keith Giffen's phenomenal with dialogue. And he even manages to kind of write teenage characters in a manner that doesn't feel like, hello, fellow teenagers, like they sound like kids, they say, occasionally it's like, okay, this is a white guy writing Latino kids, but that kind of stuff worked for me. I think it suffered from the constant changes in artists, even though the artists were all really good. Cully Hamner's amazing. That Duncan Rouleau issue was beautiful, but the tones are different. Like the tone of the artwork is different, and it kind of throws that off. There's a kind of a coherency and a unity that's sort of missing from that first arc, I think, because of the artistic stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that hits the nail on the head as to why when we get to ratings, I'm not going to rate this as highly as I might have, because genuinely, to Chad's point, I do like stories about coming-of-age superheroes. I like Ms. Marvel. I've always liked Spider-Man. I've liked Robin, the Robin-type characters. There are some good stories that you can tell with them. I think that this book suffered about a lack of consistency. From the time jumps and the art jumps, those two things were almost like two strikes against this book. For me, had there only been one of them, whether it was like maybe the same art style through the entire 12 issues, or they would have told more of a linear story with different artists, one or the other had to happen. But you put both of those on top of this sandwich, it just tastes terrible. It's not palatable at all for me. And I kept on getting lost. I really wanted to know more about this character. I wanted to like him. I'm not one of these people that was saying, like, I hate Jaime Reyes because they killed Ted Kord. Like, I wholeheartedly believe that DC is wonderful because they have legacy characters and they're able to bring in the next generation of characters and give them a good story and get them on their way. I mean, heck, isn't Blue Beetle the original archetype for Night Owl in Watchmen? Wasn't it supposed to be Blue Beetle, like the generational character? Yeah. And so, like, I have no problem with somebody else taking up the mantle of Blue Beetle. And there were some neat ideas, like they give him a kingpin character. They give him a good supporting cast with like a girlfriend and a good buddy that, like his Flash Thompson, his Mary Jane Watson. Yeah. And so they give them characters like that. But at the same time, like, boy, I really had a hard time from issue to issue, like keeping track of who the characters were, where I was supposed to be. Why, to J.A.'s point, why the Green Lantern Corps hated him. Like, to start off with, like, Guy Gardner trying to beat the crap out of him, I'm like, where's this coming from?
It's not him, it's the Scarab. There was a group of aliens called the Reach, and they were world conquerors, and they battled the Green Lantern Corps. central to that was a hive mind made up of these scarabs. So that's why. Anyway, and the Green Lanterns, they are drawn to what they need to battle. So Guy Gardner was just battling him because the Lantern told him to battle him. And then when he realizes he's a kid who's in over his head, he's like, well, I'm not going to kill a kid. Guy Gardner doesn't kill kids, which is bullshit. Guy Gardner would totally kill a kid. But anyway, it's the scarab. That's what the Green Lanterns have an issue with.
Poor K.
Yeah. I don't know if they get into it later on in the series, because this series ran 29 issues before the whole New 52 thing kind of went down. And then there was the New 52 issue that ran 16 issues. But yeah, it has something to do with the scarab, because the scarab is an alien, a piece of alien tech.
Right.
But that did confuse me a little bit with the Phantom Stranger showing up and like talking about all the magic stuff. And then the next issue, they're like, it's not magic, it's alien tech.
It's alien magic.
I was thrown off. There's all this magic. Everyone's focused on magic, and then it's not magic, and then it's alien tech versus magic. And why the big thing on magic? Why is magic so big?
Why is there that one bad guy that like is working for the Ant, and then like halfway through the series, towards the end, he's just like, no, I'm not really a bad guy. I'm just this guy in the background. And I'm just like, huh? I thought this was like you were setting up this guy to be one of his rogues gallery. Now he's just like, I'm just this guy that takes orders from the Ant. I'm just like, I don't get this. Like, inconsistency. Really, I wanted to like this book. It just suffered from inconsistency. So let's get into our ratings, because we do have a movie review. So J.A., what is our rating scale for this week?
1 out of 4 magically alien tech blue scarabs.
The scarab has a name too. The scarab is called Kajida. It's a whole thing.
Of course there is. It's a whole thing.
Well,
probably has its own Wikipedia page.
It probably does. Actually, we should find out. Anyway,
we're going to go ahead and start off with Chad. How many magic techno scarabs you given this?
Oh, buddy. This is tough. As much as I like the character, I agree there are parts of this that just weren't working for me, and I was getting bored, and I was like, all right, I can handle this. I'll just pretend like it's a movie that I fell asleep, skip through a couple pages, and then pick it up again. But I swear, by the time it got to the end, I was actually really starting to enjoy it. When they introduced Danny Garrett, and they go off, and what was the guy from the New Gods? Lonar?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the He-Man guy on that alien planet?
Yeah.
Like, that was tons of fun, and like I said, by the time I got to the end of it, I really was enjoying it. But yeah, it is plagued by inconsistency. It's weird. So many of my gripes that I have with DC books in general in this time period deal with editorial. Like, if they just had a better editorial staff, 1, they wouldn't have hated the JLI and gone after so many of the characters that I loved. 2, you wouldn't have things where, like, in one issue, the plucky redheaded girlfriend loses her shirt sleeve, and then in the next issue, everything's fine again.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how shirt sleeves work. But, and you could tell some of these issues were, well put together, and others it seemed like, we'll just get it out there. And like they were forgoing backgrounds. Like, let's put digital background in. Put some color in and mix it up. So yeah, I quality being inconsistent was the worst part of this guy. So I'm going to say 2.25. What's our thing? Rusty Scarabs?
Sure.
Rusty Scarab. I went to high school with a kid named Rusty Scarab.
All right. Well, Mikey, you're going next. So what's your...
I do love Blue Beetle. I just love him. I love Blue Beetle from when he was a character on the Electric Company on PBS when I was a kid, and it was an entirely different thing. But I remember seeing Blue Beetle comics, and I was like, I love the Blue Beetle from when I was and realized, but yeah, you know what? Honestly, I'm kind of like midway on it. It's got me interested to kind of read more, but not as a priority. So it did make me want to go back and read the Ted Kord series, which was also fun. So I'm gonna give it like a 2.5. That's low for DC. Usually I'm like a DC, apologist or whatever. I don't have anything to apologize for. 2.5 scarabs out of 4, I'd say.
J.A.?
Yeah, I'm giving it a 2. It was just too inconsistent. I thought the storytelling, as I mentioned, was unnecessarily convoluted. Had they streamlined it a bit, it probably would have been a better story. The changing art team from issue to issue didn't do it any favors. I thought there were some good ideas. They just execution wasn't quite there. It did make me want to read some more Blue Beetle, so I guess that's a positive, but it made me want to read like the original. I want to know what the old Blue Beetle was like. What did he do? What was his power set? And that's actually going to be when we get to recommendations. I'll bring that up again. So it's a 2. I don't know. Maybe the movie will be better.
You're not even going to watch it. You are already boycotting it. This movie's going to be better. Maybe we can talk him into watching it in the commercial break. Any case, on this show, oftentimes when it comes to movies, I am always talking about, like, if I was a guy that had saw the movie in the theater and then went to my comic book shop and immediately wanted to pick up a comic, figure out, like, ooh, I want to read more Blue Beetle. Would this be a good comic book for me to pick up? And unfortunately, I'm going to give this a 1.75 because it's not. This is not a good comic book for somebody to pick up that wants to know more about Jaime Reyes. Like, it's not. Like, it's really hard to follow. You need to know kind of sort of some stuff that happens before, which isn't terrible for comic books, but like nothing's really explained well ever in these 12 issues. The flashbacks don't make a lot of sense, even when there's supposed to be like moments that are supposed to be very dramatic, like they left me behind. Like, I found myself not really caring. Like, he's like, oh my God, all his family comes up to him. Oh, it's all right, Jaime. No, like, I didn't care because I wasn't made to care. Like, it was like something that happened off screen. And so, like,
you have no heart. You have no heart.
Whatever. I feel like there are better Blue Beetle, especially with Jaime Reyes. I feel like there are better books out there. I just don't think you should get this one. I think you should find another one. I think he's actually pretty good. I watched a Justice League movie once. It was an adaptation of the Judas Contract, and it had Jaime Reyes in it as a member of the Teen Titans, and I thought that was great.
In the Judas Contract?
Yeah, in the Judas Contract animated adaptation, Jaime Reyes is a member.
Did he replace somebody?
He did. Cyborg.
The New 52.
Cyborg wasn't in it.
Okay, all right, that's why. Okay.
So, but it was great. So there you go. There's a suggestion instead. Go watch the Judas Contract animated movie adaptation. Don't read this. It's not very good. Any case, we'll be right back with more of The Last Comic Shop right after these commercial breaks with our recommendations as well as a movie review. So stay tuned for that.
The Santos sisters are back with a brand new comic book. Can Alana lead the charge to find Todd's stolen car? How did Cinnamon Bun gain sentience in the Las Brisas Mall food court? And why is Ambar using drugs? All this and more in issue 5 of the Santos Sisters, in stores August 16th. Find the Santos Sisters comic book in your local comic shop or online at floatingworldcomics.com.
Greetings from the depths.
No way I can keep that up, the whole commercial. Hey, Last Comic Shop fans. My name is Winston Gambro, and I make comic books. My latest comic is called Haunted House, A Love Story. It's a story of love, grief, and horror. A sentient house falls in love with its sole residents. However, this joy is short-lived when the house is forced into a forbidden love triangle and seeks vengeance. If you want a copy of the 6-issue miniseries, you can have your local comic shop order Haunted House, A Love Story from Blood Moon Comics. Also available at winstongambro.com. That's WINSTONGAMBRO. And I'll get you a copy. Thanks so much for listening. Back to the show.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for those recommendations. Yes.
What up?
It's time of every single show where we give you other comic books in addition to the Blue Beetle 12-issue volume 1 thing that you can pick up at your local comic book shop if you are so inclined. And we're going to go ahead and start off with Chad Smith. So, Chad, what's your recommendation this week?
So my recommendation is currently in your local comic shop. I've decided to forgo Blue Beetle-based recommendations and just go with Deadpool Batter Blood. This is Rob Liefeld doing his best to channel Jack Kirby in his later years at Marvel, whenever he was just throwing out double-page spreads for no reason whatsoever, just because he wanted to and thought it would be awesome. You're getting Rob Liefeld at full Rob Liefeld. The basic plot is Arcade has a sister, Arcada.
Arcada. Oh my! Did he write this too? Did he write?
Oh
it?
yeah. Oh yeah.
Ada.
No, and it is awesome. And so she is monkeying around with Deadpool and friends, including Thumper from the last Batter Blood. If you are a Liefeld fan, this is peak Liefeld. And like I said, it does remind me of Jack Kirby, and that he's just throwing stuff out there that he thinks is cool looking and just having fun with it. And you can tell as you're reading the series, that joy comes through. And so check it out, Deadpool Batter Blood. The first 2 issues have already been out. So the 3rd issue should be on stands. You could probably pick up 1 and 2, maybe 2nd or 3rd prints, maybe. But Deadpool Batter Blood, it's worth jumping on the train. It's tons of fun.
All right. Well, I'm going to go next with my recommendation. And again, kudos to the wonderful comic book company, Humanoids. A couple of weeks back, we had Mark Russell on our particular show, thanks to Humanoids, and we talked about his book, The Incal Psychoverse. Since then, I've also covered in our recommendation section another wonderful book that they sent us at the last comic shop called 8 Limbs. But this week, man, did they knock it out of the park with All Tomorrow's Parties, the Velvet Underground story. It's written and drawn by Corin Shadby, and it is, as the title might suggest, the story of the legendary rock band, the Velvet Underground, featuring Lou Reed and Nico. And basically it is a wonderful story that kind of starts with the death of Andy Warhol. As you know, the Velvet Underground, in some ways, Andy Warhol's house band, but it kind of goes into a lot of detail as to the exact relationship that Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground had with Andy Warhol, and kind of like a symbiotic relationship, more or less, like more of a partnership than like, hey, you guys come play music for my weird, wonky movies. Although they did do that. But the reuniting of the 2 main members of the Velvet Underground, the aforementioned Lou Reed and John Cale. And so it basically tells the story of how they were friends. They made a lot of music together. Like all rock bands, they had creative differences, broke up after their 2nd album, went their separate ways, and eventually got back together, tried to put out a 3rd album, which I kind of sort of remember in the 90s because they were going to do like an unplugged thing, and then that didn't happen. Long story short, it's a wonderful book. And if you are a fan of rock music, if you are a fan of 60s and 70s pop culture history, if you're a fan of just great comic books, you should be picking up this book from Humanoids, All Tomorrow's Parties. Can't recommend it enough. It'll make you want to learn more about the Velvet Underground and listen to more of their music. I can say, for example, I didn't listen to the whole Banana album until after I read this. Just there you go.
I can't wait to get my hands on it. I've told this story before where I made a friend for life one time because somebody had mentioned fine music and they chimed in, fine music. I'm like, oh, that's it.
All right. J.A., you're up next. What's your recommendation?
So I am leaning on the group to help me with my recommendation because I'm still Blue Beetle. Is it Iron Man meets Exo Manowar meets Spider-Man? What does the suit manifest? Where are these weapons coming from? I'm all confused. Blue Beetle comes back to the 30s. He's a original Charlton character, correct?
Not okay. So, oh my gosh. So you know what? Maybe I should jump in with. You know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to give you my recommendation because that could lead you to your recommendation. So my recommendation is a book called The Blue Beetle Companion, which was put out by Tomorrow's Publishing. It is written by Christopher Irving, and it gives a history of the Blue Beetle from 1939 all the way up to, I think it ends with Ted Kord, actually. I'm not, and hard copies are sold out, but you could find it on eBay. You can download a digital copy from Tomorrow's for $6, which is in color, which is cool because the book was printed in black and white. There is a paperback version that's on Amazon right now if you wanted to. It's a used paperback version. But it would answer all of those questions. It would give you full comprehensive sort of history of the Blue Beetle, who actually started out as It was Fox Holyoke. It was the name of the company. That ran 60 issues. Then Charlton picked them up in 1955 to 1967-ish. And then it came to DC and things like that. So he's been around for a while. There's a long history.
Yeah. I mean, did he start out like a Green Hornet mask crime fighter?
Well, he wasn't a Green Hornet character at first. He was kind of like he had like a Phantom kind of vibe to him. I think the Magic Scarab came in the 1950s. I think when he went over to Charlton, I think that's where the Magic Scarab came in.
This is interesting. So your recommendation is my recommendation. So you're gonna have to recommend something else because that's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay, so then you know what else? You can on Amazon you can find paperback reprints of the old Blue Beetle issues called the Blue Beetle the Charlton Files, and it's by a company called Gwendanaland. I don't know why it's called Gwendanaland, but what they do is they actually like photograph pages in color of the best copies that they can find. So they're not like remastered reprints or anything like that. And I don't even know necessarily the legalities of these reprints, but I really don't. I don't know if they're, but I have the Black Hawk ones. And they also have the whole of Blue Beetle, the classic Blue Beetle stuff. And I have a Peacemaker one. That's all the Charlton Peacemakers in one book. And they're about $35 a volume or something like that.
All right. Well, those were our recommendations for this week. And make sure that you're checking us out every single week for more of these recommendations, as well as comic book reviews, by rate, reviewing, and subscribing over at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com. It's a terrific place where you can find all of our episodes evergreen. Lots of great stuff, including lots of past comic book / movie reviews. Like we did a whole movie May this year, movie May last year. Jay says sometimes there's too many of these comic book movies that come out in a given year. He'd rather have more Oppenheimer, but it's what sells tickets, I guess. Any case, what else does our website sell, J.A.?
We sell merchandise, T-shirts, tote bags, coffee mugs. Do we have socks? We should have socks.
We don't.
I feel like we should have socks.
Socks are important.
They are. That was like the number one thing that you needed if you were in the military was like dry socks. You get the swamp foot. Chad, jump in anytime you want.
All right. So while we might be the last comic shop podcast, we don't want to be the last comic shop. So we encourage everybody to get out there to your local comic shop and try and find some of these cool books. Whether or not you go with the Blue Beetle book 1 from 2006-ish. That's up to you, but you could also check out things like Humanoids, All Tomorrow's Parties, which I can't wait to read. Or you could check out Deadpool, Batter Blood. I forgot to mention how Arcade has Murder World. Arcada has Killville.
Oh, God.
It's great. You get Venom Pool, Shatterstorm, which is not Shatterstar. She's different from the same planet. Different. So this is Batter Blood in stores now. You could also search out that book from Tomorrow's The Blue Beetle Companion or any of the other stuff Mikey recommended as a result. What was it, Old Charlton?
Yeah, there's Old Charlton collections. That's actually
that makes as much sense.
Yeah, vaguely, possibly copyright infringement reprints.
I thought all of those were in public domain.
It might be. That might be what it is. Yeah.
Exactly. It's all other than the DC stuff. All the other Blue Beetle stuff is all in public domain. The Golden Age stuff, the Charlton stuff, it's all in public domain. So
it's
free, baby. Free.
Just like the Last Comic Shop podcast.
Right, exactly. We'll be right back with more of that Last Comic Shop podcast right after this word about BCW supplies. Jay, are you going to watch this dang movie or not?
Hi, it's Carlo Calantuan, Last Comic Shop podcast listener and comic book tragic here in the Philippines. Mabuhay! When I'm in the US, I'm always on the lookout for a good deal on boards, bags, boxes, and all other manner of comic book related supplies. And that's why I love to go to bcwsupplies.com and use the promo code LCSPOD to get 10% off of all my orders. Not only do I get a discount on everything I buy at BCW, but I'm able to support the podcast when I use LCSPOD at checkout. So if you're in need of comic book supplies, head over to bcwsupplies.com and use the promo code LCSPOD. Oh, and guys, I'm still waiting for that Tressie review. Come on, when is it?
Well, Salamat po, Carlo. We're back. And yes, I saw Blue Beetle, so I am sticking around to talk about Blue Beetle.
Hey! Look at how peer pressure works. See, you have friends, and then all of a sudden you're shelling out money for a movie that you weren't going to go see.
I have friends and a 12-year-old boy who said, "Dad, take me to see the movie."
We just want the best for you, that's all.
Oh, yes, exactly. And honestly, some initial thoughts right before we get into our official Blue Beetle review. It was pretty good. I enjoyed it quite a lot. But we'll get to that in just a second. Again, Blue Beetle here on The Last Comic Shop. So if you've been sticking around for this movie review, you will be well rewarded with this next 25 minutes or so. Any case, we're going to go ahead and get the folks that were in this particular movie from J.A. Scott and Mikey Wood. So, guys, go ahead and ping pong back and forth with this.
Okay, Blue Beetle stars Zolo Maridueña, the lead Jaime Reyes. Zolo, you might know from Cobra Kai. He has a pretty big role on Cobra Kai, which is a great show.
Yeah, and stealing the movie was Adriana Barraza as Nana, the Lolo of the family, the grandmother.
Also stealing the movie, MVP, I say, was George Lopez as Uncle Rudy.
And we also had Damien Alcazar as Alberto Reyes, Jaime's father, and El Padilla Carrillo as Jaime's mother. She was in the original Predator movie. So, yes, she's not in a lot of movies, at least Hollywood movies. She's not in a lot of Hollywood movies.
Bruna Marquezina's Jenny Cord, Belisa Escobedo as Milagro Reyes, who's Jaime's sister. She's also wonderful in the role.
And Raul Max Trujillo as Ignacio Carapax, or Omac, and Susan Sarandon chewing scenery as the big bad.
As Victoria Cord, among many other folks. And featuring Becky G as the voice of Kajida. Becky G, who I believe is a musician of some sort. I'm not really sure.
It was directed by Angel Manuel Soto on a script from Gareth Dunnett Alcacer, and we apologize for our
the names,
just destroying these names.
Right. But we don't apologize for destroying the 10-cent synopsis with spoilers. That's right. So if you haven't seen this movie, you want to just stop listening to the program right now. But Chad, why don't you give us that 10-cent synopsis?
Okay, so the film opens up and gives us a little bit of the Reyes family and the hardships they're going through as Jaime's just about graduated from college, starting to look for work, and it establishes the whole family dynamic. And then eventually, through hijinks, he ends up losing his job, but meeting Jenny Cord, who is the daughter of multi-bajillionaire Ted Cord, who used to be the Blue Beetle. Dun, dun, dun. And then fast forward a little bit, Victoria Cord, his sister, is trying to turn Cord Industries into a weapons manufacturer. Jenny's against that, so she steals the Blue Scarab. And on her way out the door, runs into Jaime again and hands it to him and says, "Here, keep this safe in this burger box." And he says, "Okay." And then he goes home and disobeys her orders not to look at it or touch it. And he touches it, and then all of a sudden, he's the Blue Beetle. And then it becomes him fighting against Omac and Victoria Cord and helping Jenny unlock the secrets that Ted Cord had left behind. And Nana gets the giant Gatling gun like Roadblock from G.I. Joe. And there you go. That's about it.
Yeah. And as I said, with my initial thoughts, I really loved this movie, honestly. I took my kids to see it, and I thought it was a lot of fun. And one thing I'm going to say, in kind of respect to the comic book that we reviewed earlier in the show, I'm going to say that this was a much better quote-unquote origin story than the one that we got in the 12-issue comic book series, just simply because it was a lot easier to follow. I loved how they had Ted Cord as kind of like this character in the background that wasn't dead per se, but just was missing. I loved the, bringing in Jenny Cord as his daughter and kind of like that connection. Like everything just made sense. If you watch comic book superhero movies, this was your standard superhero getting his powers movie, but kind of what I wanted. So
let me just get it out of the way first and foremost. This was an MCU style movie back when the MCU movies were fun. Take a little bit of Spider-Man Homecoming, where Peter Parker's learning how to deal with the suit, whereas Jaime's learning how to deal with the symbiotic Blue Beetle scarab costume and powers, and the voice in his head talking back to him and following his orders. It's a little bit of Paul Rudd's Ant-Man movies where, you have some heist elements and they're breaking in and they're, fish out of water stuff, as well as a complicated legacy, the love interest character in Jenny Cord. Sprinkle in a hearty helping of Mexican-American family flair where, it seemed like it was very culturally respectful and appropriate, and it was taken right out of the best of the MCU movies, in my opinion. And I forgot to mention, too, you have a bad guy that's the classic Marvel equal but opposite. So instead of Jebediah Stane or Yellow Jacket that becomes MODOK, now you have OMAC, which basically is another guy in a suit who has similar powers to Blue Beetle, but is a little bit better and a little bit more equipped as a military weapon.
Did anybody else think that the bad guy, OMAC, looked like that evil robot from the Black Hole? Like, was that Maximilian? I'm looking at him. I'm like, he's red, and he's got kind of like that weird rectangle head.
It was rhombi shape.
Well, what's funny is that he looks exactly like he did in the comics, but in the comics, he was Carapax the Indestructible Man, and he was in Blue Beetle Volume 6, #1. He was just a guy in a mech suit. Of course, in the movie, it's more techie and stuff like that. And that's one thing I was going to say is that as somebody who's a Blue Beetle fan and a DC fan, I was really pleased how neck deep in DC it is. Like Dan Garrett and Ted Kord and the Beetle ship, and they mention how Ted Kord didn't have the powers, whereas Dan Garrett did. I mean, that was wonderful too.
Your point, though, Mikey, I think they did it right in the fact that it didn't have to fit in any particular DC movie continuity. Like, they really stuck almost like within their lane. They mentioned Superman, Batman, but kind of like more in a generic sense. So, like, you don't have to have seen other DC movies. You don't have to care about what DC universe or cinematic thing this belongs in. It's a great DC movie that plays homage to a lot of DC things without actually saying where those things come from, honestly. I think that's nice.
It's just like if it were the real world, how Superman and Batman are Gotham and Metropolis. This is out in Palmyra City. This is, in the boonies. Batman doesn't go there.
People are so hung up about what universe does this fit in? What universe is this? Like that it's become, for me, just watch the goddamn movie and who cares? Like, and this is good because it bridges a gap. It can be anything you want it to be.
All right, so J.A., you were the one that didn't want to go see this movie. You were boycotting all superhero movies. Did this turn you around for the rest of the year?
Well, remember back before they had superhero movies in the movie theaters, like in the 90s? What did Hollywood put out ad nauseum? Rom-coms. Every week there was a new rom-com, and most of them had a very similar formula. And some were better, some were worse. Usually the better ones were not so much better for the lead actors and actresses, though sometimes that was good if you got a lead actor and actress that had really good chemistry. This movie did not have very good chemistry between the lead actor and actress. In fact, that romance was probably the worst part of the movie. But what this movie had in spades is a great ensemble secondary cast, the family. Without that family, this movie would just be a horrible paint by numbers, standard cliche-ridden drivel with bad CGI, and every time you think you know what's going to happen, it's going to happen. You can see it coming a mile away. Oh, Dad's going to die. Oh, the guy is going to say that his family is his weakness. No, his family is his strength. It was very, very standard, paint by numbers fare. The Latin Mexican American flavor they brought to it, I thought, raised it slightly above its sort of run of the mill plot, which was just, razor thin, paper thin plot.
Well, I thought the CGI was just fine. But there's only so many superhero origin stories. Like, you can look at a bunch of the Marvel movies in the same manner. They're all pretty much the same kind of, like, it's all the same stuff. So yeah, you're right. You need something else in it to make it stand out more. And that really was his family. And I mean, especially like the Nana thing with her being like a revolutionary and everything like that, just absolutely hilarious and wonderful. And you leave smiling. And yeah, I mean, Susan Sarandon in this is and that was my one complaint about it is that she's just sort of like so one note. They get into kind of interesting things when they talk about why she is sort of the way she is, and that it had to do with basically jealousy and a little bit of patriarchy going on there. And
rampant sexism. She helped build a company and then was passed over for the dude.
Right. Yeah, and you can see, but I wanted them to go into and they finally with Carapax, they finally did something toward the very end with him that was like, because he's super one note. But I wanted a little more for those two. I just want villains to have a little bit more to them instead of just being individuals that push the plots forward.
One of the big problems I had with it was I could see the strings. I'll be the one person in the country that wasn't a big fan of the Nana character. For whatever reason, it just she rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. Like it was too over the top. In a movie where there's tons of over-the-top things going on. George Lopez is like, yeah, I can do all this tech stuff and beat the giant mega corporation in 20 minutes. Give me some time in a truck. There were a lot of things where you could see the bones to this and you could see the cliches. But what it did have was heart. Mm-hmm. I mean, the family dynamic was there. It was a positive lesson. It was so much of the opposite of what's come from so many of these superhero movies lately, the Marvel stuff included. And it was a fun movie. And even though you could see the bones a little bit, I think a lot of that was forgivable because that heart was there, because the family dynamics were there, because the relationships were there. I didn't have any gripes with the CGI. It is.
When I say it was bad CGI, I don't mean it was like incompetently done CGI. It was just standard over the top CGI. There was nothing special about it, I guess. That's my entire gripe. Special. My gripe.
They made the entire bubblegum a weapon. That was awesome. All right, listen. One of the things I'm going to say when it comes to being cliche, one things that I'm going to say about like we've seen this story before is I'm also going to bring up the fact that like this used the Mex-American experience not as window dressing. And that was really great, right? This could have been one of those movies where all of that stuff is just like, hey, we're putting this stuff on top of it and there you go. But it wasn't. It really made it like crucial to the plot. It made it an experience that I can say for folks in the Mex-America culture, like you don't have a superhero movie like this. You should have one that you should watch and be able to say as a family, like, hey, this was our superhero. This was our melodrama. A coming-of-age superhero that, fights with his family against evil corporations. Sure, everything's been done before, but this was ours. And I think that's very important. And not only that, but like, I'm going to say it point blank. These are superhero movies. They're not supposed to be Oppenheimer. They're not supposed to be even Barbie or whatever. They're just there for you to watch for a little while with your kids or, just as something to do, similar to comic books. Comic books are melodrama. I'm not expecting like massive things from comics. I'm just expecting enjoyment and pleasure. And that's what I got in spades from Blue Beetle. So
I wanted to interject really quickly. The other note that I appreciated, more so than the comic even, was they went with the family that's down on their luck, facing financial hardship route instead of where in the comic they had Jaime and his friends and the gang.
And the gang thing is, if you are of Latinx, you'd probably roll your eyes about there being yet another gang. Oh, he's in a gang and he's in
right.
I mean, this show's like nobody are criminals. They love each other. Nobody's an they're
minor criminals, just like the rest of America.
Well, just like the rest of America. You're right. They're nothing major. Uncle Rudy is a fun conspiracy theorist kind of. And I love that he called the Tacoma the taco. I thought that was hilarious. Yes. It was a Toyota Tacoma. But clearly that's because of how many people of Latin descent are involved in the movie itself.
Oh, yes.
The director and I don't know the writer's deal myself. I don't know his national origin or anything like that. But you can tell that it was done by people who love that community and are part of that community.
I'm going to say this, too. To that point about the Mex-American experience, there was also that scene Victoria Cord sends those evil soldiers and starts pulling them out of their house. And I felt like, boy, that's coming from a dark, real place. That hit home from, and I mean, I'm not even of, that heritage, but I'm sure the folks that are of that heritage was like, wow, well, that's a little close to home.
As opposed to the Jaime Reyes comic, which, I mean, you could tell it was a white guy trying to write, Latin characters. Because Jaime in the comics is firmly entrenched in his culture too. But when you're not of that culture, there's a fine line between doing it right and doing it as almost a parody, or even overcompensating, or even you have to find that voice, and you have to and I don't think that you can necessarily find certain voices. It takes a strong writer to actually do it in a means that doesn't come off as either pandering or cliche or any of those kind of things. So I thought they did a really great job in this one.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get to ratings of the Blue Beetle movie. And we're going to go ahead and get our rating scale from J.A. Scott. J.A., what is our rating scale this week?
All right. So one of the climactic battle when the family's coming out, his sister had the Nintendo Power Glove. It had all these weapons built into it. A shield. It had like a big glove thingy. It had a bunch of other. So big fist, kind of almost an embiggen fist. So 1 out of 4 Nintendo Power Glove weapons.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, it's a bit of a deep cut, but I enjoyed that little nod in the movie. And don't get me wrong, Mike. Criticism of the movie, while I think is valid, doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. I just thought it was fairly standard fare.
Okay. Well, I was going to say I love this idea of the video game tie-in, because a lot of Blue Beetle's weapons that Jaime was coming up with were from video games. Like he gives himself the Mega Man Power Buster guns. He eventually makes a Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII, that massive blade thing, which my kids just loved. They just absolutely loved it. And I think that's where I'll start. I took my kids to see this movie, and they came out saying, "Dad, that was super great." And I'm like, how am I going to disagree with that? If I take my kids, they're 11 and 9 years old, if they come out smiling and having a great time, that's what movies are supposed to be as a dad. And so I thought it was a really good one. I kind of liked the chemistry between Jaime and Jenny Court. I didn't mind it. It just seemed like that kind of chemistry is in a lot of superhero movies. I liked the family dynamic. I loved George Lopez. I loved the Ted Cord Beetle Cave. I thought that was great. I don't know. I thought that if you want to see a superhero movie, nowadays, the only thing that you should worry about is whether they're done well. And there are tons of examples in which they're not. So if you're into a superhero melodrama movie, go see Blue Beetle, because I think it's great. I'm going to give it a solid 3 out of 4 Nintendo Power Gloves. J.A.
Yeah, the family's great. Other than that, it's kind of a standard paint by numbers superhero movie. If you can wait, get it on streaming, get some popcorn, watch it in front of the television. You're not going to miss anything. It's 2.5 Power Gloves for me. It's not the light gun, though. Now, if you had the light gun where you got to shake and blow it, then I don't know.
Wow. All right. We'll go with Chad next. Chad, what are you giving this?
Unlike Andy, I was not able to convince my kids to go and see this one. They could care less, which unfortunately seems to be the reaction here. And it's a shame, because although you can see the strings, although, a lot of this is superhero cliche, I do think this has something that a lot of superhero movies, Marvel movies and DC movies in general, have been missing, that made superhero movies special, where you have that combination of action and heart. This movie could be something special, and it still might be. It depends on, where it goes from here. I thought they laid excellent groundwork. I was still shocked and appalled that it's 2023 and people left the movie theater before the end credits.
Somebody asked me, is there anything more? And I was just like, I think so. And they still left. It was weird.
Yeah, stick around. There's a couple of stingers there that give promise for, stuff that might come in the future. I don't know. The way I looked at this movie, though, and I put this on Twitter or X or whatever it is these days, was I see this as the equal and opposite of the Eternals movie. Whereas when Eternals came out, I was like, oh, this is Marvel making a DC movie. Look, it's got all these artsy shots, and it's way too long, and it's boring, and nobody's going to care. This was DC Studios making a Marvel movie where they're like, yeah, let's tell a coming-of-age story and put lots of jokes and some fun supporting cast. These two, Eternals and Blue Beetle, could definitely have swapped universes and been better fits in the other respective cinematic realms. So if you're missing the old school MCU, as I've said a number of times, like, this fits. And we have mentioned that Blue Beetle costume, that works on screen as well. It was badass in the comic books. It's equally as badass here in the movie. So at the end of the day, I liked it. 3.5 Power Glove.
Nice.
All right, Mikey, wrap us up.
The Power Glove never worked. Anyway, I could never get it to work. You could
use it as a controller. I think it was easier as a controller. Hold it
sideways.
Yeah, it was very complicated, but it looked cool.
Yeah, I'm kind of 3.5 too. It's a good start for something. It is the origin movie, so the origin movies are always kind of sort of standard, but it's just like, where do they go from here? Where do they? And if I do understand it correctly, for all the people who give a damn about that kind of stuff, he is going to be included in the overarching James Gunn helmed DC universe thing. So it isn't going to be like a throwaway, which is cool because he's good. The actor's cool, the character is cool, the history is great. And I'd like to see more. I had heard a rumor that Jason Sudeikis had been cast as Ted Kord, and I absolutely love that idea, and they should do it. But and the numbers are disappointing, but the recent Marvel numbers have been disappointing too. But I think what that isn't necessarily a reflection of people's interest or non-interest in the movies, because if you look at something like Flash, the Flash is doing huge numbers digitally. I think it has to do with people's lack of interest in going to theaters anymore. I think people are waiting on things to go streaming, and I think they're waiting on things to go. And you read that a lot. People are like, oh, I'll watch it when it comes online. I'll watch it when it comes streaming. I'll watch it when it comes. And I think that's kind of the new barometer by which things have to be judged. I don't think people are hitting the theater as much as they used to. I think there's. Well,
I would say it depends on the movie. This is just not an event movie.
Which is sad, because this is a really good one.
There you go. I do think had this movie come out, 5 years earlier, it would have been received much better.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for Last Comic Shop this week. Hope you stick around next week, because we've got an hour-long interview with the legendary Marvel writer Roy Thomas. Yes, that's right. It is a tremendous interview that we cut at Hershey Comic Con this past summer, and we're really excited to get it out to all of our Last Comic Shop fans. So make sure that you're tuning in next week. Until then, I was the host with most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Chad Smith, Jay Scott, and the wonderful Mikey Wood. And we hope that you stay safe, stay Beetle-tacular, and remember that if this podcast was made by Prometheus, boy, would it be on fire.
Oh, God.
I thought you were going to say, and remember that Batman is a fascist.
That was hilarious. That was hilarious.
Comic Shop was a 2023 Black Angus production.